Hey y'all, it is Allie from the producer's room. I gave a little bit of a trigger warning for a couple of things in this episode, one of which being my journey with grief and loss in losing my dad. And I ended up talking about it a lot more than I expected to when I did that trigger warning. So basically, when I say that, I'm going to bring it up quite a bit throughout the rest of the episode in a way that I didn't expect to when I said it. So just know that. And I also have a second trigger warning in here that I do say out loud about SA. And that is a much briefer section. And I will put in the show notes how long it lasts for so that if you want to fully skip ahead from that, you absolutely can. And I do mention it a little bit in the further parts of the episode, but not really in depth. And with that, I hope you enjoyed my first solo ep. Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of Finding Mr. Hyde, the podcast. I am your host, Allie Jackson. That is the first time I have said that out loud on the public pod. I recorded my first solo Patreon last week. So thank you so much to the patrons for not only amazing feedback and just really encouraging me on this new solo podcasting journey of mine, but also for bearing with me as in my nervous haze, I did not plug in my microphone and therefore was using the computer audio, which is not as good. There's a reason we use mics. So thank you for bearing with me on that. I've done many tests just now to make sure that this audio is good. So here's hoping. I am so excited and so nervous to be here with you. I'm still getting used to monologuing. I appreciate you bearing with me. I'm really excited though. I've got so many ideas already. The thing I think I am most pumped about is the new Dating Diaries segment. I did decide to stay with Dating Diaries as the name. I reserve the right to change my mind, of course, but for now we're going with that. I think it just really encapsulates what I want it to feel like. And I really want it to feel like we are just catching up again. And I know that the thing that I think made this pod so special from the beginning is the in the trenches dating updates. Two friends chatting, gabbing about their dating lives and providing advice along the way. And that's what I want to keep infusing in this. Obviously, continuing to talk about my life and my relationship, but I don't have that in the trenches dating going on anymore, obviously. So I want to bring that back and I want to continue to infuse the podcast with that and bring some of my coaching along the way. So, y'all can kind of also get a little bit of a view into what it's like to be in a coaching session with me. But I want it to be a little bit more conversational than those would typically be. I want it to be, like I said, more like you're, listening in on two friends catching up at brunch and, maybe one of them is giving the other some advice. So that's my goal with that. I'm so excited to welcome two daters onto the pod to kick that off. That'll be happening in a couple of weeks. We'll introduce you to the first dater and then a couple weeks after that to the second dater. And then we will hear from them on a regular basis. And they're both incredible. And I can't wait. And I got so many amazing applicants. So thank you to everybody who applied. I had way more interviews than I thought I was going to. And truly every single person that I interviewed, I would want to have on the pod. So, please know that. And, I know I spoke to everybody no matter what, because one of the things I hate about interviewing for jobs is when they just don't get back to you if you don't get the job. But this isn't the not getting the job. This is a maybe for later situation. So every single person was awesome. And, as we kind of move through this and figure out what a good length of time to focus on one dater is, I'm hoping to cycle into more people and, hoping that this segment has some legs like I think it's going to. On that note, I always want your feedback, whether that's in our feedback form. I guess it's my feedback form now, which is at findingmrhyde.com/podcast. You can see there's like a submit to the pod questions, suggestions link. It's a Google form. Or, you can always DM me. If you're a patron, you can comment on the Patreon or chat with me in the Discord. I want to hear from you. I want to know what you want to hear about, guests that you would like to see, topics you want to be covered, all of that. One of the things I do plan to do is go back to some of our early episodes because we've been doing the pod for 4 years now, which is wild. We launched in February 2021. And there are some table stakes topics that we talked about back in 2021 that I think could use some revisiting, ghosting, love bombing, real meaty topics that we just haven't touched on in a long time since we do technically have episodes on them, but that was a while ago. So on that note, just please stay in touch. Let me know. And as always, if you're enjoying the show, the best way that you can help us out, besides subscribing to the Patreon, of course, is rating and reviewing the show on either Apple Pods or Spotify, or wherever you listen to your pods. But those are our two main ones, where most of you are. Spotify is gaining day by day on Apple Pods. That is super helpful for advertisers to find us, for new listeners to find us, just all of the things. And we love hearing from you. So thank you for that. Keep saying we. I guess it is still we because I do have a team that helps me out with the pod. So I guess, and it's you. You are included in the we. So yeah, that's all of our housekeeping up top. I want to start off with before I get into kind of the meat of the episode, which is going to be a little bit of a reintroduction to me, who I am, some of my history. I want to start off with a new kind of thing that I want to bring onto the pod. Hopefully every week, if there's something to talk about every week, which I'm guessing there will be, but things in the media that I see that I think are interesting, little snippets, whether that's a podcast episode of somebody else's podcast, TikTok, a reel, an article, whatever it is, related to dating or not. But I think always kind of bringing it back to how it can relate to dating and relationships. And I want to kick that off with something that I saw this morning, which is an interview with Ryan Serhant, who is a real estate, he owns a real estate firm. Is that the right word for it? Real estate agency? Real estate agency, I think is probably the better term. And he was the star of Owning Manhattan, which is a show on Netflix that was amazing, by the way. Highly recommend if you haven't seen it yet. I'm not a huge fan of reality real estate TV typically. Like, I'm not a huge fan of Selling Sunset, Property Brothers. This I liked, though. So hard recommend as a side note. He was on Felix Levine's podcast back in August. And I remember seeing him on and being like, oh, I should listen to that episode. Felix's podcast is called Unlike Me. And if that name doesn't sound familiar to you, look up a picture of him because you might recognize him as Serena Kerrigan's boyfriend. And they actually met when he had her on his podcast. Very cute story. So Felix had Ryan Serhant on his pod back in August, but just this week he's been sharing clips from that episode. Not sure why. And I saw one this morning that I just thought was amazing. And it was Ryan's advice on how to move on from something or how to not let things bother you so much. As an anxious girly, I can tell you that I have been strategizing on this for nearly my entire life, and doing a much better job of it more recently, as we'll get into later in the ep. This is something that I'm going to put into practice. Ryan said that every time something is like really bothering him and he just can't stop his mind from spinning on it, he opens up his calendar, puts an invite to himself for 30 days from now, and writes a basically journal entry into that calendar invite. He writes down everything he's feeling. He basically vents into this, how angry he is, how annoyed he is, how sad he is, anxious, whatever it is. And we all know, I think, that journaling is really helpful. I'm not that good at it, though. Like, I want to do it, and then I forget to do it. But when I do, it is really helpful. It's really helpful to write all your thoughts down and kind of, as my therapist says, separate yourself from your thoughts and separate yourself from your feelings and see them written out in black and white, whether that's, pen to paper or digitally. This takes it one step further, though, because not only are you getting the benefit of journaling, but you're also getting the benefit of that calendar invite that is going to be on your calendar in a month. And he said that he will open it. So he'll, be going about his day, whatever, going about his morning and say, oh, what do I have on my calendar? Oh, I have an open me. And invariably, most of the time when he opens it, he realizes that either, oh, that thing wasn't that big of a deal that I was upset about, or no, that did suck, but I'm over it now. Or I'm so far further than I was, I'm so much further along than I was on that topic when I wrote that thing. And now he talked about how when he sees it or when he does the calendar invite, because he's had this experience, he's been doing this for years of over and over again, realizing that the thing that he is so wrapped up in and upset about won't bother him in a month or will bother him much less in a month. He now kind of has, I would call it almost a Pavlovian response to making these calendar invites, where just making that calendar invite for a month from now and writing it out helps him because it reminds him that he's not going to be as worried about it on that day. So I'm going to start doing this. I invite you to start trying it too. And I think it's going to help. I really do. There are things, especially about work right now, as I'm, navigating not only this new solo podcasting journey, but I'm still very early days in being a business owner in my other life, in corporate retail and, self-employment fully. There are so many things that I spin and spin and spin about, or things that upset me in the moment, or, that kind of thing. Being on social media will do that to you as well. And I just know that this is going to help, and I'm super excited about it. So if you want to listen to the whole thing, it's episode 11 of Felix Levine's podcast, which is called Unlike Me. But he also posted it this week. Today's Thursday, March 6th. So he posted it probably a couple days ago on his TikTok, which is at Felix Levine. So you can look at the little clips if you don't want to listen to the whole thing. But it's very interesting. Ryan Serhant, not going to lie, kind of an asshole from how he's portrayed on the show, but really smart guy. And I like this advice of his. So I intend to use it. Okay, so I want to use this episode as, like I said, a reintroduction or maybe an introduction. I posted a little Ask Me Anything box in lieu of my weekly Ask Me Anythings, which if you're new here, on Sundays, I post an Ask Me Anything box to my Instagram story. And then either on Mondays or Tuesdays, depending on my schedule, I'll post video replies to as many as I can get to. And I do save ones that I like that I just don't have time to get to, and I'll answer them in future weeks. So I do that every week. And I also do, I'll answer recommendations on my favorite skincare or whatever that is, not in video form. This past week, though, I did what would you want to hear about in terms of a reintroduction? And I was really shocked, honestly, at how many people said that they were new podcast listeners and would love to hear really the background of the pod and where I'm coming from. And, some people have gone back to the beginning and listened through. God bless you. Most people aren't doing that, which I understand. And so I want this episode to kind of serve as a, hey, if you are just joining us, I'm Allie. Here's who I am. Here's some of my background, my history, and here's where we're at now. Let me catch you up. So on that note, that is what we're going to attempt to do here. And I'm sure along the way, I will, kind of think about things that I want to earmark for future episodes. And I wrote a very loose outline of the things I want to hit on, but I'm mostly just want to be chatting with you because as I think about what I want the vibe of this podcast to be, not only do I want to bring back that kind of chatting, in the trenches dating aspect of the podcast that it had from the start and that I want it to continue to have. But I also want, when I'm talking to you and when it's just me, for there to be this element of a friend sending you a voice note, or maybe your older sister sending you a voice note if you're one of our younger listeners, or you're just your sister in general. Or we're on FaceTime if you're watching the video and you're on the Patreon and you're watching the video. That's what I want the vibe to be. So for these episodes, obviously I do a lot of prep and I'm going to have outlines and, I've got my Notion page up in front of me. But more often than not, I just want to be chatting with you and kind of using those bullets as a guideline. But I'm not a big script person. Mostly one of the reasons is because I'm not great at reading and talking. But also because I just want to chat with you. So that's what we're going to try to do. And here we go. So hi, I'm Allie. It all started in 1987. No, I don't have that written down. That is not what we're doing here. But I was born in 1987. That is relevant. I'm 37. I'll be 38 this month. At the end of the month, I'm an Aries, for those of you who care about that. Aries sun. Oh, I got to get this right. Aries sun, Aquarius moon, Capricorn rising. Is that right? No, Sagittarius rising. My boyfriend is a Capricorn. Aries sun, Aquarius moon, Sagittarius rising. It probably goes without saying after that disaster that I am not that into astrology, but I do think it's interesting. And I've started to see astrologers on a more regular basis, and I think it's really cool. So I'm learning more about it, but I don't know much. So if you do, amazing. And those are my signs. So yeah, I will be 38 in 3 weeks, which is a very real adult age. That I didn't. How do I even want to say this? Or how am I thinking about this? It just seems so adult. And I use that word on purpose because I don't think it's old. I certainly don't feel old, But I also don't feel like I thought an almost 40-year-old would feel, and I think that's a good thing. Because I think when I think back to being a kid, being a child, a teenager, even in my 20s, like 40 was old. And people in their 20s probably still think that. But I feel like I'm just getting started and I think that's really cool. So that's where I'm at. Um, Childhood. I'm from San Diego, North County, San Diego. And I have one younger brother. He's 5 years younger than me. And my parents met when they were 19. That I think is their relationship was one of the most formative pieces of how I view love. Little bit of a trigger warning here. I am going to talk about grief and loss in this episode. Not too much, but if you don't want to hear about it at all, maybe not the best to listen to because I will mention probably a bunch in this episode that my dad did pass away in 2018. So 7 years ago. I'm not going to get like super into it in this episode though. So I will do a better job of having trigger warnings when I'm going to like really dive into my grief stuff. But my parents' relationship, I think, is a key reason that I am a romantic at heart. We had the Dateable podcast gals on a few weeks back, and their book is awesome, by the way. It's called How to Be Dateable. And in that book, they have these dating archetypes. And I'm a dreamer. You can listen to that episode if you want to hear more about that. But I think that the essence of that dreamer in me was born out of my parents' relationship. They met when they were 19. They were college sweethearts. Both of their both of their first real relationships. I think my mom, definitely my dad's first relationship. I think my mom had, I don't know if she had a boyfriend in high school, but like she dated a few other people. Not really my dad, though. My dad didn't really have serious relationships. And a lot of that came from, I mean, he was only 19, but I don't think he thought he would have them. He did not have a good childhood. He was a very private person, so I don't talk about that too often. I kind of like tiptoe around what I'm willing to share about his family and his upbringing because even though he is now gone, I just know that a lot of that would make him uncomfortable. But he did not have a good childhood. He did not have good role models for not only what healthy relationships were, but what healthy adults were, and at all. And I think that led him, I know that that led him to think that that wasn't something that he could achieve. But he did. And he and my mom had this beautiful relationship that wasn't perfect by any means, but they loved the shit out of each other. And they were so affectionate with each other. They were always holding hands, cuddling on the couch. They were just really demonstrative with their love, not only for each other, but for us. And that somebody asked me in that AMA that I posted where my like optimism and positivity comes from. It's from that. It's from seeing my parents truly love each other and fight for each other. Like watching my mom fight for my dad when he was sick. He was sick for a long time before he passed. And like seeing her advocate for him and just so many things that really showed me what love is and what it can be. And I think that a lot of that formed, obviously the sickness thing happened when I was already formed, but like my whole childhood felt like that. And I think that that is where my dreamer nature comes from. And the downside of the dreamer, as we talked about in that episode, is that I do romanticize things and I want to see the best in people and I want to see the best in situations and I want to give people grace and I want to give people second chances and third chances and fourth chances. And that leads to me getting hurt quite often. And it has historically, but I wouldn't change that about myself because I think something that I really love about myself is how open I am. And sometimes that means that I'm just walking around waiting to get hurt, as I've said before. Um, but it also means that I have some really deep relationships and that I love really deeply and that I just care fiercely about the people that I love. And so although it does lead to a lot of shit, I would also not change it. Um, so that's kind of, my family background. The other thing that I've talked about a lot on the pod is that I have struggled with anxiety and anxious attachment as a result of that anxiety throughout my entire life. I'm in a much more secure place now. Um, I consider myself secure, generally speaking. And my therapist has told me, which is exciting. I have a little bit of the achiever in me as well. I, want to get a gold star in therapy. But if anybody's seen those memes about millennials wanting to get gold stars in therapy, guilty. Um, but I do have some lingering anxieties from all of that. And when I think about my anxious attachment, so much of what we read about anxious attachment says it comes from your parents. It comes from your upbringing. And I do believe that to be true. I also think though that it can come from other things. And for me, as I've dived back into my history and into my childhood and thought about the things that made me who I am, more of it for me came from other important figures in my life, chiefly my friends and one family member in particular, who will remain anonymous, who I'm not super close with anymore, but um, a cousin of mine, not a first cousin, but my dad had a huge family, has a huge family. We kind of call everyone cousins. And this cousin, we were very, very close when I was a kid. She was a bit older than me, um, 7, 8 years older, something like that. Enough older that was significant, but not so much. Like, I basically saw her as an older sister. And she'd babysit me, and we were very, very close. And I'll say it bluntly, she was a pathological liar. And I didn't realize that. Obviously, I was a child. I didn't realize that for a very long time. And I think my parents knew. And I think they tried to protect me from it a lot, especially when in middle school, I was having a really hard time fitting in, feeling like I wasn't really the same as my friends. And I'd been going to the same school since I was 4 and feeling like I couldn't really like change who I was at all because I went to this like tiny school where everyone knows everyone and their parents and their parents' parents. And I started to exhibit some of those same tendencies. And I started to exaggerate stories and think that the truth about who I was and my experiences wasn't enough. And I needed to make up cooler stories to be cool. And I got that from her. And I thought it was normal. And it obviously wasn't. And it was really, really difficult to break out of that. And I think I was like maybe 10 when this started happening, 10 or 11, and went into therapy in middle school when I was 12 or 13. And it took several years to really break out of that. And it included separating myself from this person, this family member who I had been so close to, and really did a number on me. And I think the other thing that I was really struggling with, I mentioned my relationships with my friends at the time. I wasn't able to be vulnerable with them about what I was going through. And I try to give myself grace for that because I was 12. But as a result, all they saw was this girl who made stuff up. And they didn't see the pain that was behind it and the changes that I was trying to make about myself because I didn't share it with them. Like, how could they? Um, and so that fucked me up, frankly. Um, through no fault of theirs, like it was, and I don't want to say it was my fault because, like I said, I was 12, but it was really difficult and also really hard to separate myself from that cousin. And I know it was hard for my parents because they realized before me the kind of like detrimental impact she was having on me. Um, and I blamed them. As kids do, they blame their parents for protecting them when they don't understand. But eventually I did understand. And now I really get it. So I think those middle school formative years, I think, are really what formed my anxious attachment and my abandonment issues. and being worried that I wasn't going to be good enough because the lying and the exaggerating that I was doing in middle school was driven by that, was driven by this feeling that I wasn't going to be liked, let alone loved for just who I was. Like my parents had to love me, right? This is middle school me talking. Like my parents had to love me, but my friends didn't, and they wouldn't in my mind if I weren't cool enough. And I was not, also to be super clear, I was not cool in school. Very nerdy. And that really, I struggled with that throughout high school. Like I mentioned, I went to a really small school. There was not really an opportunity to make different friends. And I didn't want to make different friends, but I wanted to change my friendships in a way that I just didn't know how to do at the time. And the people that I am still friends with from that time in my life are people with whom I've had deep conversations about that time in my life. And we've come to a really good place about it. But that was that when I've like worked through in therapy my childhood and the things that have led me to be the way I am, I think that comes up a lot. So I went off to college. I thought that going across the country would solve everything. And if I could just get into a whole new environment where nobody knew that I was a dork and, nobody knew that I had been through all of that shit, and I could just start over, that everything would be great. And I think that's probably pretty relatable for a lot of kids who go away to school. And you probably won't be surprised to know that doesn't happen. And you don't just get to you do get to start over, but your shit follows you. Your shit comes with you if you don't deal with it. And although I had moved past the need to exaggerate who I am and my life in order to be cool and in order to be liked, although I had moved through that and past that, the core wound of that stayed. The core wound of that lingered. And so I went into college thinking that I could just forget about everything that had happened, right? That's easy. It's not, as it turns out. And trigger warning here, you might want to skip forward 10 or 15 minutes. I'm going to talk a little bit about essay in this part of the pod. Probably not 10, 15 minutes, probably more like 5 to 10. So I got to college and I did have one boyfriend in high school. I forgot to mention him. I pretty much barely talk about him because it was kind of a blip, but it was like, I don't know, 3 months. So I got to college with very little dating experience, and I had made out with 2 people in high school, that guy, the boyfriend, and then one other guy. And so I got to college like very naive in that department and having very little experience, not only like physical experience, but even just experience like flirting with guys being interested in me, having gone to that really small school and known everybody for so long and been this certain person for them. That just wasn't something I experienced. And I got to college and I had people interested in me, but I still had this core feeling that I wasn't good enough and that they didn't really like me. And also, nobody that I was meeting that I was liking wanted to actually date me. They wanted to make out with me at a frat party. They wanted to come over to my dorm room after class and like make out in my bed. And at this point, I still hadn't lost my virginity. So we're like really above the belt type of thing. But like, that is what I was experiencing. I was experiencing what we would call now a series of situationships, well, like one night stands, but also situationships. I can think of this one guy in particular who I had a math class with. I met him in my math class. I was sitting next to him, and somehow we started talking about Mario Kart. I don't know. And I had Mario Kart. I had brought my Nintendo 64 from home because I loved it so much. And one of the games that I loved the most was Mario Kart, still do. And he and I started talking about this in class one day before class or something. And so I invited him back to my dorm room to play Mario Kart. And we started doing that twice a week after this math class. And then eventually we started making out in and around Mario Kart. And I liked him so much. And I asked him eventually basically, what are we? Because I was still doing that at the time. And he was like confused. He's like, we're this, we're Mario Kart makeout buddies. I don't understand. Um, and that was my first experience with the situationship. So anyway, this was going on and on all through freshman year into sophomore year. And then sophomore year, I had a crush on this Brazilian boy who was a year younger than me. Well, he must have been. Yeah, he was a freshman. I was a sophomore, he was a freshman. And my housemates and I, or my roommates and I, were throwing a party. It was a pink party. I remember exactly what I was wearing. I'd bought it at American Apparel. If you know, you know. Went for theme parties. I was wearing this like one shoulder, it was literally fabric, but I guess it was a t-shirt dress technically. And I had this like silver belt, one of those like thick silver belts slung over the dress. Anybody that is around my age knows exactly what I'm talking about. And I wore silver heels with it. And I had these big pink earrings. And I invited him, and I did not think he was going to come. We had not hung out outside of like, I think we had a seminar together or something. I forget how I met him. But he did. And he walked in, and I was like, oh my God, so-and-so's here, the Brazilian, maybe we'll call him. And obviously everybody was drinking. It's college. And we get toward the end of the night. He's still there. Everyone's hanging out. I had my own room at the time in this apartment. It was a 2-bedroom apartment with 4 of us. And there were 2 girls that shared a room. And then I had my own room for that semester. And so I told him that. I remember saying like, oh, like I have my own room. And we go back to this room. And I remember that we had sex. And I remember telling him that I didn't want to. And that I was waiting for love. And I remember him saying, well, it's not love, but here it is, or something like that. I remember him was like, well, it's not love. I don't know. And then he left. And I didn't talk to him for a year. And he texted me junior year. And he asked if we could meet up. And I did. And he apologized. And I think that apology was the first time that I had even let myself think about what had happened and let myself realize what he had done. And maybe that was what I don't know what was going on his end, but like, and I never talked to him again. I've seen him around, but haven't spoken to him since that day. And that experience, kicking off my sexual journey, if you will, with that experience, really did a number on me as it relates, especially as it relates to my anxious attachment and my feeling of not being good enough. And I think that I wanted so badly to believe that if that didn't mean anything, if sex didn't mean anything, then that didn't mean anything. And that I didn't need to be upset about that if sex wasn't a big deal. So I made sex not a big deal. I pretended that sex was not a big deal for a long time. I was 19 when that happened, and I was probably 24 or 25 when I realized that it was, in fact, a big deal to me. And during that time, I certainly over-sexualized myself in an attempt to make that not a problem. But it was a problem. And it's one that it took me a very long time to face. And I didn't call it sexual assault for a very long time. A very long time. Really recently, honestly. And I have a lot of grace for my 19-year-old self because I just I then let myself is the wrong word because I don't want to put blame on myself for this, but I think that I thought it was my fault because I had invited him to my party And I liked him, right? Like in my head, I'm like, this is a good thing. I have a crush on this guy. And I can just see it so clearly now and how it led to all of the issues that I dealt with in my 20s surrounding sex and things that still come up for me. Um, very, very sparingly these days, thanks to a whole lot of therapy and self-reflection, and work, but things that still come up. And it took me a long time to face that. And it made dating in my 20s really tumultuous. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to start talking about dating on social media is because I went through the fucking ringer with it. And my dad got sick when I was about 26. So about halfway through my 20s, that happened. And if we thought I had abandonment issues before that, just wait. But wait, there's more. Um, and then, so now here's where I'll get into some of the so that that was a little bit longer than I was expecting, but I think hopefully a little bit helpful in terms of um, the background of where I've been, where I'm coming from, and some of uh, the things that make me who I am and the things that I've worked through in my life. And now the other thing I wanted to talk about today is like the nicknames that I mention on the pod, and the people who come up and what I learned from them and that kind of thing. I'm also realizing though that I am at nearly 40 minutes of recording and at the halfway point of what I wanted to talk about today. So I think there's going to need to be a part 2 of this. I did not expect to be continuing to talk about this for so long. So I'm thinking what I'll do is I will do my life up until the pod on this episode, and then we will do a part 2 next week of my life since the pod and the nicknames that I talk about. So I didn't have a boyfriend for all of college. I forgot to mention that. Like I said, many, many situationships. One in particular that comes to mind that like I still get annoyed about when I think about. We didn't have that word at the time, but that's what it was. And of course, he is now married to the girl that he started dating, or that he was dating like when we were freshmen, and then broke up with, and then he and I were like a thing in quotes or whatever, and then they got back together, and now they're married and they have kids. So nobody serious in college whatsoever, but I deeply and yes, desperately wanted that. And that is not a good place to come at dating from. This place of feeling like you need it. Like I needed attention from men. I needed validation from men. And I felt like if I could just find what my parents had, which it should be noted that they did meet at 19, and that was sure as hell in the back of my head throughout college. Like, my parents met by now. What the fuck is wrong with me, right? Even though 19 is objectively, even at in their time, a very young time to meet your person. And they actually didn't even get married until they were 26, 27. But they'd already met. So I'm in the back of my mind, I'm like, I'm behind these markers of where I thought my life would be, because I didn't know that that was very abnormal. And looking back on it, I'm like, thank God I'm not married to any of the dudes I knew at 19. But at the time, quite difficult. And I was seeing all of my friends have relationships and, in my mind, much more quote unquote success than what I was having. Coupled with the fact that I was figuring out what I wanted to do with my life in a world in which everyone seemed to already know. Like everyone, I went to Wharton undergrad, and which is a business school, and everyone there knew that they wanted to be in finance. And that's not true, but that's what it felt like. And I didn't. Not that I didn't know, I knew that I didn't. And it took me a while to find my place and find retail and find consumer psychology, which is one of my degrees is in consumer psychology. And I think that's a big reason why I am so passionate about this work that I'm doing now, is because of that. So I really moved to New York, still not feeling confident in myself, still feeling like I didn't quite know my place in the world. And not super confident in my friendships. I had a couple significant friend breakups, one in college, one just past college, like 2 or 3 years after, from somebody that I was close to in college, that really rocked me. And I know that those breakups came as a direct result of me not being confident in who I was. And either cultivating friendships with people who didn't really know me or I wasn't really aligned to, or not showing my full self to people because I didn't feel comfortable with what that was. And luckily, senior year, I met one of my now closest friends who I lived with for 7 years in New York, and she is like a sister to me. And that relationship and that friendship really healed me in a lot of ways in terms of like somebody who didn't have to love me loving me. I think that was the first time that I experienced that. And not for nothing, I think it was also one of the first times that I brought my true authentic self to a friendship. So duh. Like, it's all very obvious when you look back on these things. Um, so moved to New York, was living with my best friend, which was amazing. Still haven't forgiven her husband for stealing her away from me. No, I'm kidding. I love you because they listen. My first boyfriend, we call him the Resident. So here's where we'll get into like some nickname stuff of like pre-pod people. My very first boyfriend, like as an adult, I don't count my high school boyfriend. His nickname is the Resident. He was a resident at the time, older than me. This is the only time that I dated in my whole life that I dated someone significantly older than me. And not by that much, but let's see, I think 24 and he was 29. So like not crazy, right? But like since then, I have mostly dated people who were either younger than me or like just my age or like a little bit older. He was 5 years older than me. When I look back on the power dynamic of that relationship, I put him on such a high pedestal, not only because he was older than me, but also because he, in my mind, was so much more established in life. He was a doctor. He, was like working at this amazing hospital in the city. He had all of these deep friendships, and like all of his friends had really serious partners, or they were married, or they were having kids. And I was this like 24-year-old fuck up. And this is in my mind, right? Like I'm this like 24-year-old shithead who's like having a party bus birthday with her friends and inviting him and him being like, what the fuck is this? Or like going to SantaCon during the day and then going to his like fancy black tie hospital fundraiser at night and having all his friends be like, you have glitter on your face. So so looking back at that, I think that relationship, which was not quite 6 months, it was pretty short. It was my first adult boyfriend, but also I don't really think I learned anything about relationships because I wasn't an active participant in it. Like I was just the entire time. It was almost like I was treading water the entire time. Like he well, I hope he doesn't realize that he's dating this 24-year-old idiot is how I was like thinking about it, which is I wasn't a 24-year-old idiot. I was doing 24-year-old things, but like I was 24. And so he met my mom, actually. He's one of my boyfriends who met parents. He helped her plan a surprise for my birthday. So that was my first relationship, and I think that although looking back on it, the relationship dynamic was not great. I mean, he was very kind to me and he's a good person, but like although the relationship dynamic wasn't something that I want because I wasn't really being myself in it and I was very, very anxious about myself while in it, it did help me realize that there were going to be people who saw my value for more than physical. And that was the first person who had that I also wanted to date since high school. And so that really kicked things off for me in terms of my sort of healing journey. My dad was diagnosed with cancer right after I broke up with him, or he broke up with me, to be to be super clear. But, um, and that obviously was really hard, but I'm very glad that it happened when it did because I was on this sort of like healing journey from a lot of the shit that had happened to me in childhood or that I had not just happened to me, but that I had been a part of as well, and had happened to me in childhood and in college. Um, so I don't talk about him very often, but the resident. My longest relationship happened after that, and we call him the coach because I met him coaching volleyball. I think he still coaches actually. And the coach and I dated for almost 2 years. We didn't quite hit our 2-year anniversary. And that was an amazing relationship. Towards the end, I realized that he wasn't my person. And it took me a very long time is an exaggeration, but it took me several months to really come to terms with that and break up with him. He had broken up with me, and I was devastated. And the very next day, he came crawling back saying that he'd made a mistake. And I should have realized that he hadn't. But I didn't. I took him back, and then we dated for another 6 months, maybe? I forget exactly how long, until I realized, wait, no, you were right. You had the right idea. We should not be together. At which point he was devastated, but it was the right thing. And we're still friendly. He doesn't live in New York anymore, but we usually get drinks when he comes to town or when I go where he lives. Um, Really, really wonderful guy. Not my guy. But that relationship really taught me about being authentic in a relationship and not hiding the stickier parts of me from someone. My dad was sick when we were dating, really early on in his sickness though, so it wasn't like an omnipresent thing, but it was hard. He came home one time with me for Thanksgiving and met both my parents. And my dad took him golfing and it went terribly. Like just because he's really bad, not because he didn't like him. Um, and I went and met his family and it wasn't right, but it really, again, it continued that kind of journey towards me realizing my worth and that I could be in a healthy relationship and I wanted to be in a healthy relationship and I wanted love to feel differently than I had felt it feel. Felt it feel? Yeah. In the past. Um, and that was when I really started to heal with sex as well. And, when I first started dating the resident, when I first started dating the coach, I had a lot of triggers come up. And being with somebody for that long and becoming comfortable with somebody across that period of time was invaluable in helping me with that. And I credit him for a lot of it and myself and my therapist. But it was just really I learned a lot in that respect and about myself and about how I wanted to feel in a relationship and how I didn't want to feel. Ultimately realizing that he wasn't my person and I just didn't there wasn't anything wrong. I think that was one of the hardest things to come to terms with, which happened again with another guy that I'll talk about. There wasn't anything wrong, but I just felt wrong. I felt wrong. Like by the time that I actually broke up with him, like pretty much every time we hung out, my whole body was screaming at me, this is wrong. You're not meant to be with this person. And I think what made it so hard was twofold. One, my body lies to me all the time. My anxiety lies to me all the time. And I am much better at sussing out those lies these days, but I was not very good at it then. And because I knew that, I didn't trust my body because I couldn't trust my body at the time. And I thought my anxiety was just sabotaging me. And it turns out it was trying to save me. From making the wrong decision, which would have been moving in with him and getting engaged and getting married and having kids with him, which is what all of my friends were doing with their partners at the time. So when the coach and I started dating was around the same time that all of my friends from college, I was in a really, really tight knit group of girlfriends in New York that all went to Penn together. There were 6 of us. Pretty much all of us started dating people around the same time when I started dating the coach. They are all still married to those people. And I'm so happy for them. Like, they're married to wonderful, wonderful people and they have amazing partnerships. But I think that is one of the things that made it so hard for me to end that relationship, is because I was seeing these two divergent paths and realizing if I make this decision, I am going down a different path than everyone I know. And that was fucking scary. And I'm still to this day, to this day, I'm obviously very, very glad that I did it, but it was really hard. And that is actually where my advice about making new friends comes from. When people ask, what do I do? All my friends are engaged, all my friends are in relationships, all my friends are getting married or having kids, and I'm not. And that's really hard. I get it, because that was me when I broke up with the coach. Um, and what I did is I really leaned into friends I had made in other places in life, volleyball being the biggest one, but I cultivated friendships with people who were doing things that I was doing at the time, and still stayed very, very close friends to all of my college girls, and still am to this day, although none of them live in New York anymore, unfortunately. Um, but leaning into those other friendships really helped me see that the path that I was choosing was not worse, it was just different. And maybe I would end up merging back with their path someday, and maybe not, but, like, my path was gonna be really great. Um, and I am still, like I said, I'm very, very grateful that I chose that path. So that path really kicked off another round of situationships for your girl. Although again, we did not have that word at the time. But, at first I was just kind of sowing my oats. I had just gotten out of this long relationship. I was excited to date again. This is around the time that Bumble came out. So I was like pumped to be a beta tester of Bumble. But again, I just kept finding myself in these situations where I was dating somebody who didn't really know who I was because I was not showing them. And I was showing them what I thought they wanted. I was reading books like Men Love Bitches and, just reading this, ingesting this dating advice that really made me feel like I couldn't be my authentic self, that people were not going to like that. Men specifically were not going to like that. And if I wanted a guy, that I was going to have to fit into this certain box. And I tried that and it didn't work out. Surprise, surprise. It led to, like I said, it led to a lot of situationships. It led to me accepting less than I deserve from people who I don't even think I liked in retrospect, or in hindsight. But I liked that they liked me. But they didn't actually like me. They liked this front that I was putting up. But you can't put up a front forever, nor do you want to, or I don't. And so what would happen is that I had this pattern where I would be dating somebody and then I would start to get a little comfortable and I would start to show him a little bit more of who I am, a little bit more of the sticky stuff, like I was saying. And then he would leave. Either, break up with me, ghost me, whatever it is. And I would be like that asshole. Like I started to open up to him and then he bounced. And sure, ghosting, never good. But also, Allie, you were not showing him who you are from the beginning. So the person that he liked wasn't even you. And this is something that came up for me a lot in my late 20s. And I realize now how much my dad getting sicker and sicker was in parallel with this was affecting me. And I didn't at the time. It seems so obvious now, but I just didn't see it at the time. I didn't see how that was draining me to the point where I didn't wanna show up with all of that on a first date or even early dating, right? But I didn't know how to do anything in the middle, so I just showed up with none of it, and that didn't lead to anything good. A couple of nicknames that came up during this time, the chef, is not a good person. It's the first person that I have talked about here that I would say "fuck you" to. Um, when I had two of my best friends on the Patreon, man, a couple of years ago now, and one of the questions that the listeners submitted was, "Who's your least favorite person that Allie has ever dated?" And the chef. He sucked. He went on vacation with his ex-girlfriend to Mexico. She lived in Mexico. So he like went to visit her basically in Mexico without telling me and cheated on me while he was there. Obviously, it was with his ex-girlfriend. Um, the story is much longer, but suffice to say that that was not the first time that he had done something shitty, though it was the last time that I allowed him to do something shitty to me, but it wasn't the first time. And I continued to be in that pattern with him for a while. Um, the other guy that I dated around that in that time, who was a really nice person, is the dentist. And the dentist was the quintessential nice guy, not my guy. Similar to the coach, a little bit different. The dentist was Canadian. He was a dentist, obviously. And I met him in person. This is also somebody I dated who was a little shorter than me. Fun fact. I should have mentioned that up top also. Well, we haven't even gotten to the pod part yet, but during this time, also leading up to me dating the coach, I was blogging about my dating life back when like WordPress was a thing and like literal blogs, like live journal type shit. I was blogging about my dating life using nicknames. The coach was not his nickname at the time. I don't remember what it was. But my friend came up with the name, like the pen name Finding Mr. Height, because I am 6 feet tall. For those of you who don't know that, nearly 6 feet tall. And so I am Miss Height looking for my Mr. Height. And that is where this comes from. And I tend to date guys that are taller than me. The dentist was shorter than me, though. So the dentist was super nice. Like, that is the first word that comes to mind. And I know that that sounds like such an insult, but he's Canadian. So nice. I met him in person at a friend's event, and it was a Halloween event, and he was dressed as Garth from Wayne's World. I think Garth is the one that's blonde, like the Mike Myers character. I think that's Garth, but the long blonde wig with like the big thick rim glasses. I had literally no idea what this guy looked like until our first date. I had no idea. I basically was like, hopefully he recognizes me because I was dressed as like a poodle girl that night. I wasn't wearing anything on my face. So I'm like, this guy's going to have to recognize me because I have no clue what he looks like. Turned out he was very cute. And we dated through my 30th birthday. I turned 30 with the dentist, and he was like at my 30th birthday party. And shortly after that, I think we'd been dating for maybe 4 months, something like that. He was starting to talk about, he was in dental residency, and he was starting to talk about where he was going to work full time. And he had always planned on going back to Canada. He went to dental school here. He was doing his residency, but he'd always talked about going back to Canada. And he was talking about not doing that because of me. And that sent, oh, no, shockwaves through my body. And this time I listened to those shockwaves, and I realized that this was not my person. And although he was very, very nice and so good to me, it just wasn't the connection that I was looking for. Not to use it in one of my text scripts, but it just wasn't the connection that I was looking for. And I listened to my body on that this time and ended things with him. And I think he knew that it was the right thing as well. I think he was relieved, honestly, when I ended things, because I think looking back that he felt it too and just was having a harder time parsing through those feelings. So I broke up with the dentist shortly after my 30th birthday. We're now in 2017. And my dad is getting really, really, really sick. And I ended up moving home for about 6 months leading up to when he eventually passed away. And obviously that rocked me. And I really struggled with reconciling the kind of positive outlook that my parents had instilled upon me, and that especially my dad really, frankly, had instilled upon me, with the fact that this thing that was just so unfair had happened. And it definitely triggered my attachment wound. It triggered so much. And we have entire episodes about grieving and about my grief journey in particular. I have Instagram story highlights about it as well. So I won't get like super into that aspect of it right now. If you want to know more about it, you can listen to those episodes in particular. But suffice to say that it really affected the way that I attached to people. And again, it should seem obvious, but I didn't realize how much. I didn't realize the magnitude of how that happening was going to affect how I interacted with everyone and especially men. And so my dad died in the middle of 2018. I came back to New York. His memorial was a few months after he passed. 2 days before I flew home for my memorial, I met ASV. And ASV stands for the Aspiring Sober Vegan, which is a nickname that Rourke coined. Rourke was my first co-host of the pod. And it's because when he broke up with me, he said he wanted to move to Ohio and be sober and a vegan, but he never did either of those things. So that's why he's aspiring. So ASV and I met in August, and we dated casually, I would say, for most of that year, like the rest of that year. It was kind of like a situationship, and I was going back and forth from New York to home, and he was finishing up med school, and it was just like a little casual. And then he ghosted me, which I was especially annoyed about because I met him through a very close friend of mine. So I was like, "What do you mean you're going to ghost me? I'm going to see you all the time. Like you're friend. We're friends with the same people." Um, and he eventually did apologize for that. And we ended up getting back together around my birthday in March. It was like literally on my birthday, at my birthday party, in 2019. And then we dated for pretty much that entire year. And it ended up being mostly a long distance relationship, or I guess technically it's middle distance because he moved to Philly. And had this planned. That's where he went to residency, and had it planned while we weren't talking. Not that I probably would have factored in, but I, as mentioned, anxiously attached. He was incredibly avoidant. And one of the things I think attachment theory that is often tricky with attachment theory, especially a lot of books about it, like the book Attached, for example, which overall I think is really good, but I also think that avoidant attachment gets villainized a lot. And to make it seem like avoidants don't care. And I don't think that's true at all. I don't think there is any form of attachment, whether it's insecure or secure. And if it's insecure, what type of insecurity that is inherently better or worse, that makes the person better or worse. I do think it is better to be secure just for everybody's sake. But there's nothing inherently bad about you if you have insecure attachment, or if you, and what kind of insecure attachment you have. So I want to start with that because I think that when we say that somebody is avoidant, there's just such a negative connotation to it versus if we say that somebody is anxious. And so it's not that him being avoidant was his fault, but our dynamics as a very, very anxiously attached person who had just lost one of the most important people in their lives, trying to date somebody who is not only avoidant, but also like not that interested in dealing with it. And I was like, or maybe not aware. I shouldn't say not that interested because I don't know that. What I do know is that he wasn't dealing with it in the same way that I was not dealing with my anxiety at the time. It took a while to realize that it was there. That dynamic was just terrible. It was just for both of us. And we had a lot of amazing things about that relationship. I really, really, really learned from that relationship a lot of good things too, like how I want to feel about someone and how I want someone to treat me as a partner. He liked to use that word partner. Was the first time I'd been with somebody who liked that, and I really liked that concept. And he was silly and fun, and we goofed around together but could also get really serious. Like there were so many good things about him and about our relationship, but that dynamic of what triggered each of us did not work. And maybe it could have if we had really been committed to working on it together, but it did not work. And being long distance didn't help with that. It made it a lot worse because I would get more and more anxious because we were apart and act out in the way that anxious attachments act out, and, try to pull him closer, which in turn triggers avoidance, and he would try to push me away. And that, kind of very relatable, I'm sure, to people listening, anxious, avoidant, push, pull was really, really negative for both of us. And I didn't really see that at the time, though. I see it now in crystal clear HD, but I didn't see it at the time. And one of the things that I look back on when I think about the reason that I love giving dating advice and relationship advice and I love coaching people is because I know how hard it is to see something about yourself, even if it is so fucking obvious to everyone else, including your future self. I know how hard it is firsthand. And there's still stuff about me that I don't see, right? Like that's always going to be true about everybody. But I think one of the things that healing from that relationship and realizing the ways that I contributed to its dynamic, in addition to the ways that he did, I'm not entirely to blame, but like realizing how I contributed and the things that I could have done to make that dynamic better and the things that I wanted to do in the future to avoid that kind of dynamic, whether that's pick different people or, work on myself or probably both, definitely both. That's one of the things that really made me want to start helping other people is from that experience. And as I think about all of the stories that I've told across the last hour about my life and the things that I've worked through and all of that emotionally to come to the place where I am now, which wait for part 2. Which I didn't mean to do to you all, but I also don't want to record a 2-hour podcast episode. Nobody wants that. That is what made me want to do this. That is what made me, once I realized what I had, because originally I did start posting on social media without really thinking about it, which I'll talk about next week. But like, once I realized what I could do and how I could leverage the things that I've gone through and the things that I've overcome and worked through to help people and to connect with people and build community. And that was a game changer for me. And I think although my relationship with ASV was so, so difficult and took me a long time to get over, probably I would say the longest of any relationship I've had to truly be over it. Even though I did start dating right away, I shouldn't have. Um, that was one of the things that really pushed me into, in hindsight, into wanting to do this, is like really coming full circle with that. Um, so now we're at the end of 2019 going into 2020, and that is when I started posting on social media about my dating life. And so I will save that for part 2. But and my, sort of like phase 2 of my life, or phase 55. If you take nothing else from the last hour of stories about me, make it be, please, that all of those things that I thought were wrong with me are the things that make me who I am and are the things that I think make me, can put me in a position where I can give advice and where I think I'm good at it and I like it. And coming from that personal experience and having made the mistakes and continuing to make mistakes, don't get me wrong. In part 2, we'll talk about a lot of mistakes. I made many, 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 despite having healed from a lot of stuff. Still making them. That is actually, though, I think what makes me able to do this in the way that I do, because I want to come at it from, hey, I've been there and here's how I got through that, or here's what has helped me. And, there are a lot of things about my life that have been amazing. Like I mentioned, my parents' relationship, my childhood, I had a very, very fortunate upbringing in that sense. I come from a lot of privilege in that sense. And a lot of that is what has set me up to be where I am at in life, to have been able to go to the school that I went to and get the job that I got afterwards because of the school that I went to. And all of these things, I also know that there are a lot of things emotionally that I have struggled with. And I think like I said, if you take nothing away from the last hour, have it be that the things that you think are wrong with you are actually gonna be your superpower. You just have to confront them. And that's really hard, especially because they like to hide and disguise themselves as other shit. But that's what I will leave you with. I will leave you with that. And I love you all. Thank you for being with me here on this journey. And we will talk next week.